Welcome to the YourTown television program. My name is Jeff Kline, and I'm your host for this segment of the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation YourTown segment, where we host interesting faculty and students and what they're doing on campus. This segment, we're welcoming Carl Albing. Albing. That's exactly right. I'm sorry. But welcome to the show, Carl. You're recently hired NPS. We were very fortunate to capture your talents within our data science and analytics group. We'd like to learn a little bit more about you, though, before we actually talk about what you're doing on campus.
Sure.
So you have degrees in mathematics and degrees in business. You have a PhD in computer science. And you have an extensive background in working with industry and programming, as well as you're a published author. So let's start off with what took you along this path. What took you into the science and math field and programming field?
I like to tell people I'm the poster child for lifelong learning. It was never a case where I just felt like I knew enough. But mathematics was a likely place to start just because it helps explain the way the world works. And so it was always fascinating to me to see.
Even as a high school student?
Oh, yeah. Even as an elementary school student, when I learned how you could take the shadow of a flagpole and using that and a little bit of mathematics figure out the height of the flagpole, it was like, oh, what amazing capability that was. You didn't have to climb the flagpole with a tape measure, you know. And so it just seemed like a marvelous and intriguing field.
I have to tell you this story then because you said that. I was fishing at 7 years old. I was fishing with my grandfather once, and it was a small fishing pond. And he said, "Do you know how far it is across that pond?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, let's figure it out." And I thought, "Well, you're going to have to walk across the pond." He said, "No, we're just going to walk across right angle." And he taught me Pythagorean theorem right there.
Wow.
I thought, how cool is that? So yours was a flagpole, mine was a fishing pond.
Yeah, exactly.
So where did you go to high school?
I graduated down in Clearwater, Florida.
Okay, great.
My family had been living up in New York State at the time, and Dad got transferred down to the Tampa Bay area.
That was a cultural change.
But I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I mean, pool in the house, you know, in the yard, and the beach 5 minutes away. It was a marvelous place.
It was amazing you were able to study then, for credit.
Yeah. But then for college, I sort of reversed that, and I headed up to Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
And,
okay.
20 below temps and things like that in the extreme. But it was a fantastic mathematics department at St. Olaf College, and they were just a marvelous place to learn that, and is where I discovered computers.
Oh,
we had a little taste of that in high school, but it wasn't until I got to college that I really got my hands on the machines and was able to do some fun stuff that some of the things I've learned I use to this day, which for a field that changes as much as computing does, it's sort of amazing to have some longevity to that information.
And when you're exposed to the computer inside, though, you still went and did an undergraduate degree in mathematics.
That's correct.
And then what inspired you to go on to the next step?
Because the computer science was something I wanted to do, and it was early enough that there weren't a lot of computer science programs. I went and did a year graduate study at the University of Maryland in computer science and found that, I wanted to program. I wanted to do this stuff, not just study it. And so I took a job with Honeywell back in Minnesota, and that began my career in industry. I'm a recent arrival in academia.
Okay. Well, now, actually, you jumped around in many industry besides just Honeywell, later than becoming a consultant. So what were some of the companies you worked through?
Oh, big and small companies. There were some little ones that you'd never heard of, and there were bigger ones like NCR and Cray.
Right.
And I spent most of my career at two different times with Cray. But in the computer industry, there's a lot of churn. There's a lot of you work for a while, move somewhere. And for me, that was often associated with a new challenge, something new and exciting to do, something new to learn. So it was a way to both have good work, but also good challenges.
So you worked in industry for the time being, but why did you decide then to actually go and get a PhD?
Once my kids were looking at colleges, and I got excited about academia again, and I thought, for the latter part of my career, it would be nice to share what I'd learned and the excitement of what I'd learned and what I enjoyed doing so much. At the time, the computer industry was it's never really had a big downturn, but was sort of a soft period right after in 2000 when the internet bubble burst.
Right.
And so a lot of programs that we talked to were saying, well, they're enrollment was flat. And I thought, well, you need some excitement. You need people who really love this stuff. I would love to come and teach. And I found out in order to do that, really, you needed a PhD.
Right.
So I thought, well, if I can keep my day job and get a PhD, it seems like a lot of work, but it was a fun challenge, and that's what I did.
Oh, really? Well, how did you get your PhD then?
I worked with the University of Reading over in England. Several UK universities have what they call a part-time working away program.
Oh, neat.
And so you can take your day job, and it's often meant for government research labs and places like that. I knew folks at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, at the big Department of Energy lab there, who had done this, and were working with the University of Reading, where you can take the research projects you're working on and use that as the foundation for your PhD research.
Oh, so you can combine what you're working on with the dissertation work.
Right. And so I found an interesting problem at Cray, something that our group was working on that was sort of a gnarly, well, we were kind of ignoring it as a problem and saying, well, we'll just do this instead. And I took that and ran with it and said, well, let's explore that, see how far we can get. Academically pushing that, does that open up any new frontiers for us? And it turned out to be a marvelous step forward.
Well, what inspired you to begin to publish books?
Ooh.
In fact, let's see if I got these right. So one is, the exciting title is Java Application Development on Linux. I actually kind of understand that.
Yeah.
But Bash Cookbook?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
We did get fan mail from someone who said his mother-in-law had gotten up one morning, found her in the morning sitting in the chair, puzzled. She'd gotten up early, found this Bash Cookbook, and thought it was like a recipe cookbook, a kitchen cookbook. No, the cookbook series is something that O'Reilly, our publisher, has done that is meant to be short, like recipes, but short, task-oriented solutions. So rather than just laying out the theory, it was meant to be very specific, small tasks that you want to accomplish as a way to explain the theory. Now, Bash is the command line language that's used in Linux and Unix and operating systems like that.
Right.
It's now available on Windows in various forms as well. But the GUI, the graphical user interface that most people use, is point and click. Take your mouse, move it around, point and click. And that's good for a lot of tasks, especially for certain individual tasks. But as system administrators or somebody who has a large task to do, imagine trying to rename with your GUI. Imagine trying to rename 250 files, give them each a different file name. You can do that on a command line where you type commands and you can use patterns and say, well, a particular pattern, if it matches this pattern, change it to that pattern. And thus, you've got tremendous command capabilities, tremendous power and capability at your fingertips. And Bash is the name of the program that does that in Linux. It's part of the category of what's called shell.
Right, so it can control large data sets and manipulations of those data sets?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. Number of files, or I mean, you can do it with individual files, but even large number of files. And sometimes it's just flat out more productive. You can type sometimes faster, a few commands, a few words than you can pointing and clicking and hunting and opening and closing. I mean, GUI's great for certain tasks, but for other things, nothing beats the command line.
So, actually, as an old guy, I've had to use that command line more than once as well.
Sure, that was how computing started.
That's exactly right. But so, what inspired you to actually write these books, though? I mean, were you approached in order to do it, or did you see something in industry that lacked?
I had a colleague at a company where I was working who had just published a book with a bunch of friends. They had gotten together and done a book, and it looked really neat, and it looked like fun. Just the brag value of it, if nothing else. And
What'd you learn about writing it? Was it fun?
I learned more by writing it. I went in thinking, the Bash Cookbook in particular, I thought I knew a lot about that subject, and the deeper I dug, the more I knew that I needed to learn. And boy, did I learn that subject. And even still, there's a lot I still need to learn. I've got a third book coming out, Rapid Cyber Ops, again by O'Reilly. Rapid Cybersecurity Ops is what it's called.
Rapid Cybersecurity Ops. Okay.
And the rapid part is because with a command language like Bash, you have the ability to do things quickly and respond that you may not have the same kind of quick reaction to.
So if you see some attack occurring, you can quickly modify or change things to prevent it or seek something else.
Yeah, or to diagnose it. And sometimes in certain situations, that may be the only tool you have. There are fantastic third-party tools that can be used for cybersecurity things, but but sometimes you're just down sort of close to the metal, very few tools, and you just have something like Bash available to you, and it's amazing what you can do with it. So we're demonstrating that. I'm working with all of these books. I've had co-authors, and
Right.
they bring some real expertise to it that's been invaluable in this case as well.
Now we're jumping ahead in my timeline, but I'll go ahead and ask this. For this particular book and the knowledge you're acquiring for it, are you contributing, or have you started to get a chance yet to contribute to our cybersecurity group at all?
No, I haven't. The data analytics group has kept me busy enough.
All right, we're going to get there, but
there is some
after
overlap.
the show, you may suddenly get hit up on some things.
But there is tremendous overlap, because a lot of what's involved in cybersecurity is you're digging through big quantities.
Sure.
You've got huge quantities of log files of everybody who's logged into your system, everybody who's accessed your web page.
Now, you were a distinguished visiting professor at the U.S. Naval Academy.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen, and was that your first exposure to the Navy?
That was my first exposure to the Navy and really to academia as well. I was, having gotten the PhD in 2012, I was looking for something interesting to do with it, and came across, cast my net wide and was looking at opportunities around the country. And when that one came up, it just seemed too good to pass up, and I didn't really expect to get it, but asked, because if you don't ask, they can't say yes.
Well, no, that's exactly right.
And interviewed, and the particular program is one that was gift funds that bring in people from industry with some with good academic credentials,
Right.
but from industry
With practical experience.
right? So that you can sort of augment a department. Every department has their own set of faculty with their expertise, and this way they could bring in somebody different, somebody with some outside experience. And in my case, it was high performance computing, the supercomputing work I'd done at Cray.
Mm-hmm. And were you there for a year, or how long were you there?
It was, I interviewed for a one-year position. When I was there in the interview, they said, well, would you consider a 2-year appointment, because we get better return on our investment.
Sure.
It's oftentimes that first year. And my lesson in interviews is you never say no in an interview. You always say yes.
Sure.
And especially because I wasn't expecting to get the appointment. And then they said yes, so I found myself with a 2-year appointment. They extended it for 1 year each, 2 more times, and but the program has a limit of 4 years, so that they get this changeover, and you're getting new faculty with new expertise, different technical interests.
Sure. Well, the Naval Academy was probably an interesting place to get your first taste of academia.
Mm-hmm.
You also got your first taste of the Navy there. So what was probably your biggest cultural shock about the service? Anything at all, or was it natural to go on a very disciplined campus like that?
It was a fun challenge. It was really interesting. I don't think of it in terms of a shock, but maybe it was just that a bit of advice I had received from one of my colleagues was that the students that you see while they're in uniform can seem very intimidating, because you've got this classroom full of uniforms at you, but he says if you look behind the uniform, they're just college kids.
Yeah.
And in a sense, that was very true.
Well, that is true.
And having raised 3 boys myself, my wife and I had raised 3 boys who are now all done with college, to go there and see college kids, I sort of knew that. I knew what that felt like, and I could understand that. And it was
Very well-disciplined college kids.
Well, that's true.
With a high class attendance.
Yeah, and incredibly talented. Oh,
Yeah.
that was maybe a bigger shock than anything military, was just how smart all those kids were.
Oh yeah, and inquisitive.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fantastic. Now we have a program at MPS called the Bowman Scholar, where we take some graduates from the Naval Post from the Academy, come directly to NPS. Did you know any of those at all? Or?
I did. When I was here interviewing, was sitting outside at the coffee shop and talking to another student who was here on a longer-term program. He was one of my first-year students that when I was there the first year. And up came this Bowman Scholar and said,
Yeah.
Dr. Albing, Dr.
Oh,
Albing.
so he remembered you.
Oh, yeah. And well, because he had just graduated the year before, and so it was fun for him fun for me to see him, and fun to connect again.
Well, that's great. And now, how were we able to capture you at NPS? What attracted you to the Naval Postgraduate School?
Yeah, it had some of the best of all the worlds of, you know, and you mentioned in my background, I'd worked for small companies and for large companies, and the small companies have that ability to innovate and to do something new and to react quickly. The large companies have an advantage in that they have resources to address a problem with. And the data analytics group that's being started up here at NPS has got sort of that best of both worlds. We've got the resources of the government behind us, but we've got, because we're starting up a new organization, we've got that flexibility. We haven't set down rigid patterns of what we're doing, how we're doing things. So it was a fun opportunity to both learn some new and exciting things, use what I've known and apply that in exciting ways, and do it in a very fast, changing, exciting field.
That's a good point. You are on the invention of the floor here. We are trying to put it together, and we're trying to put it together not just for the school, but as a resource for the entire Department of Defense. And so you're going to help define those rules.
I hope so.
That's great.
Yeah, the Data Science and Analytics Group is just perfectly positioned, it seemed, and an exciting time to be here.
So what do we have doing in that group?
A number of things. First of all, I've only been in the group for about less than 2 months, I think, at this point.
I should have said that's right. So you're not an experienced postgraduate school person yet, but
no,
you will be.
No, that's true. And the Data Science and Analytics Group was only established officially in June of this past summer. So it's all pretty new. But my title is research professor, so I'm heavily involved in research efforts. But I also have some teaching responsibilities, or will have, as those go along. And that includes things like curriculum development, where I can help enhance lab exercises for existing courses, or help develop new courses, or teach some of the existing courses.
Now, one of the major concerns, and it's not a major concern, it's probably a blessings of plenty, is that we'll probably have a lot of research coming in quite frequently and quite quickly on a topic that's really interdisciplinary. So because many people want data to help them make the decisions and the use of that information, where do you see data science going at MPS? Or first, how do you define data science, and why is it an interdisciplinary type program?
Data science is interdisciplinary because it involves really sort of the overlap of some different areas. Because it's data, you've got the natural computer science piece to it, right? Where do you store it? How do you store it? How do you keep it fresh for long term? But the analytics part is where statistics and mathematics comes in. It's one thing to just have a lot of data and move it around, but how do you do things effectively to pull information out of that? How do you extract information in a way that can provide, people use that contrast between data and information. It's one thing to have a whole lot of numbers. It's another thing to know what those numbers are telling you, what direction are things heading, or, for example.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Now, the other aspect is that I've learned is that sometimes when people ask questions, their data doesn't actually exist to support answering that question. And so setting up the data or extracting data or collecting the data in order to do that might be important. Will that be part of this center as well?
Almost anything related to data is gonna touch on us, and I could well see us doing something like that, because the question is, how do we collect the data? We may be generating lots of data, but we may not be saving it anywhere. So how can we save it? What kind of policies should we have about our data? How long do we keep it? Where do we keep it? How safe does it need to be? How do we make it safe? All those things begin to touch as something we can provide advice on.
So where do you personally want to take your research?
I'll take it where the challenges lead.
You're going to take it problem by problem. That's great. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. I mean, the scale of problems that we deal with here, and because it's DoD, it's often life and death kind of issues. Sometimes it's purchasing, and how do we buy the most efficient whatever. But sometimes it's life and death information, and that's a challenge I don't want to walk away from. That's exciting and has some real ramifications.
Well, Carl, I think we're very fortunate to have you at the Naval Postgraduate School.
It's a fun to be here.
I look forward to actually seeing all the great work that the group does and what your research takes and helps DoD. And thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks. I hope to come back and be able to tell you about some of that.
That we can. We'll make that a date in a couple of years.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And thank you for joining us in this segment of the YourTown television program, sponsored by the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation.